Greetings. Thanks for being here. If you are watching, it's because you're meant to watch. Spirit wanted you to watch this. So I'm talking today about grief on the spiritual awakening journey. I got this download yesterday while I was driving and I felt compelled to share it. We know that is the feelings and emotions that you experience when somebody transitions to the spiritual realm. What is really happening there is that there's an attachment. It doesn't always have to do with love, but rather it's the attachment to the person that brings about the grief. And we also know that there's grief in non-living things that die, which is life transitions, like a relationship that you're ending, or you're leaving a particular job or career or industry, you're moving to a different city, you could be changing religions or spiritual foundations, even theoretical beliefs or concepts that you used to hold dear to you, and those things formed your identity. Those are life transitions, which is a non-living thing, and there's grief associated with that. What I wanted to talk about today is grief on the awakening journey, because we are all on an awakening journey, and that looks different for everyone, which is based on many factors. And some factors are based on like how many lifetimes you previously lived. So someone who's been here for 30 lifetimes might have a different way of relating to the world and moving through that process of awakening than someone who's only been here for 2 lifetimes, or this is their first lifetime being here. And what can affect the pace of your awakening is like the affiliations that you have and how deeply entrenched those affiliations have become in your life. Certain vows or oaths that you said to yourself that you never do, or things that you hold on to very dearly that you are very rooted in. And the awakening journey involves this process of surrendering and releasing and unlearning the roots to those affiliations, and then this willingness to let go. The willingness to let go or not is what affects the pace of the journey for you. When you're awakening, it means that you're on a journey of coming home to yourself, knowing yourself, remembering, because the journey that our soul makes from cosmic to earth side, we forget this process of who we are and why we came. And the journey of awakening essentially involves us remembering. And we pick up identities along the way. But once we raise our level of consciousness, this begins to bring about internal changes, which in effect, those identities can no longer be sustained. And some internal changes can look like changing our emotional state. So we respond instead of reacting. It no longer is a matter of like regulating or managing our emotions, because that has this kind of connotation like we're controlling or manhandling our emotions. But the internal change can look like we're recognizing that there's something happening and there's energy in motion, which is what an emotion is. And so we look at this and we say, okay, what does this mean? What meaning am I ascribing to this thing? Where is it coming from? And we make a choice at that point to let it move through us or not. And we can go back to our earthly way of handling things, but there's a choice there. And so that's one way of an internal change. And then there's mental aspects where our thought field might be different now. So we have a choice of the thoughts that we want to entertain, because as spirit beings, we're always attracting energies, right? When we raise our consciousness, we now have a choice of, okay, we are present, we are aware of ourselves. That awareness is greater. So we can see the things that come into our purview, and we can choose if we want to entertain that. We can choose if we don't want to engage in a certain thought loops in that moment. And then later on, we can go back and say, okay, let's explore the root or foundation of this thing so that this thought loop no longer remains a loop in our lives and is no longer attached to us. So we have a better awareness of our thought field, and this can cause a change in our mindset, or a change in the way that we see ourselves, a change in the way that we view other people, and how we view the world. This is essentially all a process of our physical consciousness meeting our spiritual consciousness or our spirit. And so we know that On the awakening journey, you'll find that everything's always working out for our highest and best self. It's always working out for our greater good. And so if we tend to operate in ways that are very much in alignment with survival mode, we are now being guided to the thing that is best for our highest self. And we're now at the point where we can start considering choices that will have us to remain in alignment with our highest self, aka our spirit. And so the next thing that comes once we have these internal changes is a reflection in the outside world, or the 3D. And we begin to do things differently. Like on a physical level, we might start taking care of ourselves, or we might have discipline about what we put into our body. Now that we have the knowledge that our spirit, as a contract, it said, hey, I'm going to come down to earth side to complete something. And it chose the particular physical form that you're in for whatever reason. And that reason, that form is usually what would work best for us to complete the purpose that we have. So for me to be on this journey of awakening and assisting others, particularly Black and African descendants, on their journey of awakening and remembering self, it worked best for me to be a Black woman. So I can do that. And so changes in the physical realm, or 3D, can look like honoring our physical form that was chosen by our spirit and loving it beyond massages or pampering, but really identifying the foods that are nourishing to us, truly to our bodies, and charging our bodies with that electrical energy. External change can also look like a particular mindset. So how we approach conversations and relationships might be differently. We're no longer operating or interacting with people from a place of emotions. We're communicating in ways that work best for the relationship, but also allow us to convey the messages that we need to convey, not false messages that perpetuate cycles out of the fear of the outcome, if what would happen if we said the thing that we really wanted to say. And we're not communicating recklessly because we've suppressed for so long, but we communicate in a way that honors the relationship that we have with the person or the thing. So the changes in the external can bring about life transitions as we change our environment. And that can look like, hey, I was in this job or this relationship based on a made up identity that I carried, which was rooted in survival mode or my root chakra. And now with this knowledge of self that I have, I know that that wasn't me. And so being on a journey of meeting your highest and best self and being in alignment with that can look like, okay, this is no longer the best place for me to stay. My time has come to an end at this job. I don't have to stay here anymore just to make money. My time with this relationship has come to an end. I don't have to stay here anymore to feel safe or comfortable or fulfill some sort of need, because of something that was unhealed, an unhealed wound. Or I don't have to keep engaging in this particular activity or doing this pattern anymore because it was just a temporary fix for something that I was lacking within. So once we have removed the thing that was falsely meeting our real needs, we have space to create the thing or have the real thing that we need fulfilled. And so the desire to engage in hobbies or patterns isn't there anymore. You might not crave drama and chaotic cycle or the cycle of validation. And so you move forward differently to show the results of your internal transformation. And that's what I call life transitions. And we know the life transitions causes grief as we shift our attachment, or release our attachment. But there is another space, the period in between, like awakening and increase of awareness and presence and knowledge of self and consciousness, and like just before you get to the point where you're making external changes to your environment, which is the life transitions piece. That space right there is like pressure, like you're in the cooking pot. And this is important because during that time we're being formed like coal crushing to become a diamond, and we're still like one foot in, we're here with the awakened self, and one foot here in the 3D environment that doesn't yet reflect the awakenings that we've had inside. And so when that pressure becomes too hot, you might have this desire to like try and revert back to how things used to be internally, because like we know that's familiar to us, that that's comfortable. We know that that previous space very well because we've existed in it for decades. And now we're saying we're going to have to do something different about it because we want to recognize that whatever we do before kept us surviving. And no, we're no longer looking to just survive. We want to thrive. And when the knowing of what it takes to thrive tells us that what we will have to change in the 3D will bring about grief, that might cause us to revert to avoid grief. This creates a situation because that's not really what's reverting is not really what's in alignment with our spirit. And also it's like a denial or trickery of ourselves because the idea of reverting says that like awakening is like putting on a new dress. And if we don't like what wearing the new dress might have us end up in, then we can just take it off and put on our old clothes again. But the reality is that awakening doesn't work that way. We can't unawaken once we make that reconnection with spirit and we get to go into a deeper, more intimate connection. We can't unsee the things we've seen. We can't unexperience the things that we've experienced. And I liken it to like in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve ate the fruit and then their eyes were open. And even if they wanted to throw up the fruit, they wouldn't be able to unexperience the things that they've unexperienced or unsee what they now see, or unknow what they now know. And so you can perceive the pain from changing in the 3D because there's very hard things that you might have to do after decades of creating a world based on unawakenedness and survival. And now your spirit's like, well, you don't really need this anymore. So it's good. There's going to come a time where you have to let it go or surrender to the process of letting it go. And we don't want to feel pain because the attachment hasn't fully left or there's uncertainty in what our life is going to look like after the 3D change is made. So we know all of this, so we perceive all of this, and so that space between awakening and actually doing the thing causes grief. And it causes grief because it calls for a different aspect of ourselves that we are not used to engaging with in the 3D realm. And so the only thing to do is to continue interacting with your spirit or direction and engage with the grief. Acknowledge that grief is there by experiencing. We cannot run away from the awakening process because our spiritual eye is open. As humans, we have this tendency to run towards pleasure and away from pain, but this process and experience of awakening is going to call for us to experience the grief wholly. And so in that process, we must dismantle our beliefs and understandings about grief because we might think that grief is strictly negative energies in motion, but perhaps we have to see it as a spectrum now where there's the pain and hurt, but also there's joy and laughter and peace. And this can all exist on the same continuum. And we can get there by having an openness and experiencing the thing. So we can look at grief as a master teacher. And in the grief, we can find more information about ourselves, develop a deeper connection, go the places within that we were afraid of to go within because we had certain ideas of what that would look like. Finding out more places about ourselves where we are deeply rooted and attached and yet to awaken. And so we can engage with grief and ask her questions. We can ask our spirit to show us the roots of our fear, which is the thing that's blocking us from experiencing the full continuum of grief so that you can actually get to the point where you take action in the 3D realm as a result of these beautiful transformations that you're undergoing within. And so in all of this, your trusted self will deepen and mature so that you don't have to second guess if you're on the right path or if you're doing it right or doing it wrong because you lean less on external validation or crowdsourcing for what to do and more on your knowing. And that's all we want to do at the end of the day. Get back to that. Get back to our true selves. And you get familiar with what it feels like to know in the physical form. So it's like the messages from the spirit realm are transmitted here to your physical without interference. Okay, so there is grief before you even make life transitions, changes in the 3D realm. There is grief in that space of, wow, this is me. I'm knowing myself. I'm awakened. I now see what I see. things are happening internally within. I know that this is going to result in something different here. In that space, we must acknowledge that grief and engage with her and be fully present with all the things that come with that grief, and not just looking at it from a very negative standpoint, but also the the full breadth of the grief experience. And this makes our process of making changes within the 3D realm so much more easier and smoother once we've acknowledged this initial grief that we will have experienced before we get to the changes. Okay, so thanks for listening, and let me know what this ignited within you. But blessings to you on your spiritual awakening journey, or your journey of life, and I will talk to you soon when I have another download. Peace.